So as we gather here today to discuss the essential role of the EU-Canada partnership in promoting sustainable development and the responsible management of critical raw materials, it's important that we also acknowledge the challenges and the opportunities that exist in the international landscape. And indeed, many of our colleagues today have started to touch on that. We here at UCAN recognize Canada and the EU continue to condemn in the strongest possible terms Russia's unprovoked and unjustified military aggression against Ukraine, which is a blatant violation of international law, including the UN Charter. And we are honored to have with us Her Excellency Yuliya Kovaliv, Ukraine's ambassador to Canada. Her Excellency has more than 10 years' experience in executive positions in public administration and in investment promotion. Prior to joining the embassy in March of 2022, she held various roles in the Ukrainian government, including Deputy Head of the Office of the President of Ukraine and Deputy Chair of the Supervisory Board of National State-Owned Oil and Gas Company, Naftogaz of Ukraine. She has also served as Deputy First Minister for Economic Development and Trade, overseeing reforms in privatization, corporate governance, investment policy, energy sector liberalization, and IP. The ambassador will provide us with a keynote speech on the importance of international cooperation in building a sustainable and prosperous future for all, after which we will have a short Q&A from the audience. Your Excellency.
Good morning, everybody. I think probably I will do that way. Good morning, everybody, and it's my great pleasure and honor to have an opportunity to address to you today. And first of all, I would like to thank you to the EU-Canada Chamber of Commerce for such a great event, for the opportunity to have these deep conversations in a turbulent world where all of us, both as the citizens and all of the companies, as the employers, need to navigate and work on building more sustainable future for everybody of us. And probably I will start with that both EU and Canada have been for many years an important and I would say strategic partners for Ukraine as a country. And after February 24th, when Russia started its unprovoked aggression and actually the war against Ukraine, both support from Canada and support from EU and all of the European countries, US and the coalition of over 50 countries who are today actively helping and supporting Ukraine, whether it's military support, whether it's financial support, humanitarian support, helping my country to resist and helping my country to fight against brutal aggression is very important, and we are very grateful for that. I also would like to thank to many of the companies in the private sector who made a strong stamp on condemning Russia, on following the sanction regime, on stopping operations with Russia and Russian companies. This is a very important test for all of us in terms of the values, because there is usually a chapter on each of the company's website where a company is stating about the values. And I think for all of us that was a big test on how deep we are stick and how strong we are stick to those values which we declare as our company. And I would like to thank you, both EU companies and Canadian companies who exited Russian market, who stopped the operations, and many of those who donated to support Ukraine and Ukrainians. We do value, and your support, you should be sure your support made a big difference for 40 million country who is over 14 months fighting the biggest war after the Second World War on the European continent. Another important thing, and it was already mentioned today and on the panel and the speakers, that geopolitics and security and the political risks, it's something that brought the turbulence both into the global economy, increasing inflation, challenging the supply chains, and putting, I think, a totally different approach for many companies on how you plan, how you build your strategy, understanding that the world has changed. After Russian full-scale aggression, this was the red line that many of you probably and many of Ukrainians still, for the final moment, when in 5 a.m. in the morning Russian missiles started to hit civilian infrastructure, nobody believed that it could be ever possible. But with the help of the world, Ukraine is fighting. Ukraine is not only holding a line, but since the start of the war, will liberate it, a big territory, is bringing back the life to the people. Of course, the horror of the war, it can't be even, shared here. This 90,000 of the war crimes, genocide, sexual crimes, this is all what we are living through. But the resistance of Ukraine is high. And today I would like more to talk about the economic resistance. Because you can imagine the war that brought the 30% of the economy of the big country, 40 million country, very close to Canada in terms of the population. Many people, over like 6 million people, left the country. Massive destruction. But in the same time, what Ukraine and Ukrainian business community showed is the same big resistance as our men and women on the front line. As we look today, Ukraine, the foreign reserves of the country are at the pre-war level. The currency, Ukrainian currency, is for the last 9 months stable. Ukraine never defaulted. So even during the first months of the hard attacks, Ukraine managed to negotiate with all of our investors and bondholders and made the restructuring but never defaulted. Ukrainian banking system for a single day stopped working. Just with the exemption of the small branches of the banks on the occupied territories, all of the other banking systems were working despite of the war. It never happened before in a country where you will face a full-scale war. This is the digital services that the government continue to provide, allows millions of people to get everything from the government, including the licenses, including any of the permissions, to be in a different part of the country by using the smartphone, using the applications. And this is about the resistance. The resistance also is about agri-sector. As you well know, Ukraine is one of the top agri-exporters in the world. And when the war broke up, it also significantly challenged all of the logistic routes for all of the agri-export. But we, as Ukraine, were more than ever interested to continue export the food and grain to the global market, because we understood and we historically survived through Holodomor. That was artificial famine that Soviet regime brought to Ukraine in 1932, 1933, and we understood how much the food is important for the globe. And our farmers, despite of the shelling, despite of the missile attacks on the food elevators, despite of the lack of diesel, lack of fertilizers, they keep on sowing and they keep on collecting the harvest. Unfortunately, today we feel another attempts of Russia to disrupt the Black Sea mechanism of exporting the grain. But I would assure Ukraine is the most interested country to bring this food to the global market. The war also brought a lot of challenges, not only for Ukraine, but for the global economy and for EU. For many years, some European countries were dependent and deep dependent on Russian fossil fuels. And Russia was using energy as a weapon, not only getting huge revenues from exporting oil and gas, but also building this dependency on and political leverage to many of the countries. And with the significant package of sanctions, that finally stopped. And it also brought a chance to build a new energy, to refuse on too much dependence of the fossil fuels. And it's also brought together all of EU countries with a new package of $27 billion fund for the encouragement of sustainable development. Never before this transformation happened in such a speed. Germany built 2 LNG terminals in 9 months. Have anybody in this room ever expected that this speed could have ever happened? But it is happening. The same is with the development of the new wind farms, new solar the interest from the joint European continent in more diversified energy flow, including the clean energy, where the critical minerals are becoming the very important part of this. So it's changing the whole landscape. But as I would like to come back to Ukraine and our economic resistance, the country suffered 410 billion losses. This is the estimation that World Bank a month ago published. It means that Ukraine, after the war, will be the biggest capital investment place in Europe, and I will probably argue that at some point of time in the world. And what's Ukrainian approach to this rebuilding? First, it's build better. So we will not rebuild the Soviet-style buildings. We will not rebuild coal energy. We will not rebuild logistics as it was built 50 years ago. Ukraine needs very strong partners to implement this approach of building better. We need new technologies. We need your experience. We need your services. And of course, we will need investments, because $411 billion of the damages, it's the big investment program where we will welcome the private sector to step in. In terms of this rebuilding, there is one important thing. Rebuilding has already started. Rebuilding starts in Ukraine an hour after the missile attack hit either the infrastructure, or whether it's electricity grid, or whether it's thermal power plant. In an hour, our rescue team are already on the ground, and they are already rebuilding. Ukrainian business, they were the first who started to come back on the ground, who started to rebuild those plants and factories who have been destroyed, and are quite successful. And then the foreign companies. McDonald's in Ukraine are opening new restaurants. The private investment fund has just raised $250 million for the new investments in Ukraine just during the war. And there are many, many such kind of the cases when the Unilever is building new plant, new production facility just near Kyiv. So the business, especially the European business, who is closer to Ukraine, who has more ties and more value chain, where Ukraine is a part of the European value chain, they are already coming back. And also, I think it's one of the first time in the history when Ukraine as a country got, in the middle of the war, got the 4-year program with IMF worth of $15.6 billion, which is not only a part of providing Ukraine loans, but it also, as Ukraine committed, even in the time of the war, to continue with the structural reforms. But this is not different that it was pre-war time, because Ukraine got the status of the candidate to EU membership. And a lot of, I would say most of Ukrainian policies of the government will be focused in implementing the legislation which will bring us to the membership of European Union. So if you ask me what will be the big difference between looking in Ukraine as a place of investing 2 years before and now, I would tell you that there are like 4 big things. First, the rebuilding of Ukraine will be too big to ignore. $411 billion, that's big. And there will be the place for a lot of companies to step in. The second thing is Ukraine on the way to be a full-scale EU member of the European Union. And so the policies, the regulation, the regulatory environment, and how the government is working on it, the EU will be the big anchor of determining on how Ukraine will be moving. And we are optimistic that it will come in several years, the longest. The third thing is we are quite sure understanding that a lot of you will ask me, and what's about the risks? And especially when you're thinking about doing something in the country which is in fighting the war, there are the risks. And we understand it, and we are starting to address this. And first of all, it's the instrument about the ensuring the war risks. We are now working with the international institutions, including the World Bank armed MIGA, and also all the G7 export credit agencies are on board in this discussion to introduce the unified mechanism, both for Canadian business, for US business, for EU business, to secure the war risks, so that any of your investment would be first of all bankable, and then will be more insured. Of course, like the more air defense Ukraine will be getting from our partners, the less costly this insurance will be. But that is another important thing where we are working on. And the fourth thing, there will be, and there already is, a big support of international financial institutions. If you will ask me where is the money, I will tell you, even today, European Bank of Reconstruction and Development committed for this and next year $3 billion for the private sector and the infrastructure project to be already built in Ukraine. IFC is also now bringing together over $1 billion of fund to support the private sector in their rebuilding efforts in Ukraine. European Investment Bank and many other financial institutions will be side by side with you as the business community to be engaged in the rebuilding. Their concessional financing, their guarantee mechanism will be a part of de-risking and a part of making you more comfortable as they know the market, as they can guide you through questions that you will have, but they will be inside together with us. So the rebuilding of Ukraine will be huge, and it's already happening. And it will be a competition. As a lot of companies have the interest in Ukraine, and especially I would urge Canadian companies not to lose the time, because many of your colleagues from European Union and from US are already on the ground with the business missions, with talking to our Chamber of Commerce, to Ukrainian private sector, and exploring the opportunities. Because it's better now not to be late. Thank you.
So we'll take some questions. Yeah, let's sit. That's better. Adrian, do we have a mic?
While everyone thinks of their questions, this is more of a comment than a question, which I think beyond the inspiration of the resiliency of the Ukrainian people, I think when you just spoke about the rebuilding of Ukraine, I think it's a huge inspiration of how we can deal with today while we're still planning for the future. So I think it's a great inspiration how the focus of how you want to rebuild and how Ukraine will fit in the future is happening at the same time that you're dealing with the crisis of today. And I think sometimes we look at a crisis as a pause on how do we address the future. And I think you're showing us how it's possible to deal with today and deal with the future. And so some of these other topics that we're thinking about seem difficult, but in contrast should be quite easy for us to deal with both. So thank you for the inspiration.
I have a question. I was at a conference in Brussels in December, and there was a woman there from Ukraine. She represented a chamber of commerce. And you've talked a lot about hopefully Canadian investment. You talked about Unilever going in. We know that Kingspan has committed to going and helping with the rebuild. This woman was speaking a lot about SMEs. We know about the many challenges on the ground. How can we here in Canada, how can we help the SMEs to rebuild? Obviously, businesses have been utterly devastated. What kind of investment and commitment would we consider there?
Thank you. And it's really a good question, because the SME is the basic of the economy, which gives a lot of jobs and which encourage people. For us, there is now also a big chance with the SMEs is also bringing and empowering more women. Because the reality is, when the country is in the war, that many of the men are fighting on the front line. And the role of the women naturally is not only to care about the family, but also to become more active. Whatever it's the business, whatever it's being an employee or being a civil society activist. And we see more and more women who are starting their own small and even the micro business. So what Ukrainian government is now doing, we are providing the grants, we are providing the support, we are providing education and training to those who want to start their businesses. And this program is already for like working for the 12 months, and we see more and more people starting their own SME. What is also important, and what if we could do, and I think it's important the education and encouragement, because a lot of them never started their own business. They want not only to build this business in Ukraine, but to explore whether they can at some point export their services. And by the way, we finalized the modernization of our Canada-Ukraine free trade agreement. So what could be done? First of all is sharing experience, educational programs for them, and of course the programs to support them, whether it's the small grants, whether it's the guiding them how to went to the export markets. That's essentially important. And it's also an example how on the one side supporting economy, we also thinking about building better, because empowering women, it's something that each of the country were dealing for many years in a traditional way. And now we have a chance out of the big horror of the war to build up also on that from a different angle.
Do we have another question?
Right here. Yuliya, thank you so much for joining us, and I'll echo Adrian's comments in saying that this has been inspirational. I particularly found to be inspirational your comments about opportunities to rebuild Ukraine for the West to contribute, but I also think the opportunities can flow the other way. In particular, I know Ukraine has this amazing service called Dia, which is an online app, for those of you who don't know, that allows access to an astonishing array of government services to the citizenry of Ukraine. It's truly a digital economy, harbinger of digital economy. So my question for you is, I think there is great benefit, potential benefit for Canadians, and I know there are already discussions with the various governments in the United States about exporting that technology. Are there any discussions ongoing with either the federal government or any of the provincial governments about potentially bringing that kind of Ukrainian technology here? Thank you.
Thank you. That's a brilliant question. I haven't, touched in my speech. Ukraine is very strong on digital and on the talent. And Ukraine is the motherland of our 8 unicorns. And our government put a lot of efforts to bring all the processes into digital. Yes, Dia is actually the first country in the world where we had an electronic passport. So all of Ukrainians can travel throughout of the country having only smartphone. You have your COVID vaccination, you have your passport, you have your birth certificate, you have your tax record, driving license, everything. And more important, it survived the severe cyber attacks just before the invasion and during this 14 months of the war. So the digital government infrastructure is tested on the hardest way, meaning that we survived not one, not two, but hundreds of these cyber attacks. So it is really strong. And the same with the banking sector and online banking. To be frank, I would rather bring some of them here in terms of the services. And yes, we are working with the provincial government. There are a few of them who already acknowledge some of the documents, so you don't need to bring the papers for them, but just the electronic documents. And we are looking for the timing to make the presentation of our DIA project. This is the government digital platform here in Canada, both for provincial government and the federal government. The same we are doing with in many EU countries and in US. But also there is one more thing, the IT sector is the one that's still growing despite the war. So this sector grew for the last 8 years 7 times. We have over 250,000 of IT specialists who are working in the IT sector in Ukraine. And many of these companies are providing services both to Canadian companies. Few of them even have big offices here in downtown of Toronto, and they are continuing to expand. So this is another sector which will especially, I think, our modernized free trade agreement between Ukraine and Canada has also now a big part on the digital trade, will also boost these opportunities for the cooperation.
Thank you, Artem. I just wanted to ask Madam Ambassador, first of all, I had the great opportunity back in November last year of attending the Rebuild Ukraine conference in downtown Toronto. And that was, again, I would say again, you mentioned Kathy Kingspan, there was many multinational countries from around the world participating in that. During the break, you did mention that there was a program being spearheaded through Poland, through Krakow, that you said that if potentially Canadian companies wanted to partner with Polish companies in the rebuilding process, would you be able to elaborate on that at all, or you were saying something based out of Krakow in Poland that someone was
probably, I think you mistakenly heard about
okay.
Krakow, but there is a big now cooperation between the Polish business and Ukrainian one because most of the cross-border trade is now going through Poland. So that brought up a lot of, and to be frank, none of us were ready. The first months of the war, the biggest logistic challenge was just to find the wagons, to find the diesel, to find so many trucks that were needed just to bring both the metals, iron ore, all of the agri products and everything else to Ukraine and back. But we saw the resilience of the private sector because we as Ukrainian government, we were working hand in hand every day with the private sector, both in Ukraine and European countries, doing everything what none of them ever thought it could be done. Like increasing for 3 months the volumes of agri-export through railways and through the roads 5 times. None of them. So there were discussions with some railroad operators in Europe. And then, when all that went on track, they said, look, it was crazy. In the normal times, none of us would ever think that our processes can go this way.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for attending. Marek Godin, European Club of Canada, and I am Polish origin, but stuck in Canada since 1981. a part of Poland is now the Ukraine. So this is the called Rzeczypospolita. So this is the ongoing process of 1920 war, which was Poland defeated Bolshevik army. So now we are facing President Biden. When he was in Poland, he said that this war will continue for 5 years. I listened to the television in Canada. So I'm economist also, and a journalist. So my question to you is now Europe, Poland, Bulgaria, and other countries are facing the overflowing of the grain, which is supposed to be exported to Africa, but it's sold on the market in Poland and other countries. So when there is a conflict now between the farmers because of the grain price went down, because of the import from of the food products from Ukraine. So are you going to see a tunnel if some other countries could supply some ships so the cargo could be sent to the original market, which I believe in Africa?
If we are talking about the agro-logistic first, there are no conflicts. The partners and the friends sometimes have discussions. And we all manage to fruitfully settle down. There is none of the transit of Ukrainian grain is working now through the European countries. The problem now is back to the Istanbul initiative about the Black Sea. So Russians now, for the last 3 weeks, they, for example, can voluntarily pick up this ship and check them, and everybody else is standing in the line. And probably those of you who works in logistics understand that it just disrupts all of the timing, value chain, it brings higher costs. So Russians are now trying to put a pressure on the Istanbul deal, and as a consequence, the ability of Ukraine to export grain to the global market, which usually brings a risk for the prices, significantly go up as we witnessed last year. So it's not the problem of the ships, and it's not the problem of Ukraine. The problem is in Russia. So Russia is back trying to push everybody in that discussion, putting at risk prices, putting at risk lack of enough supply of the grains, but not Ukraine.
Please join me in thanking Her Excellency for these very thoughtful comments. Thank you very much.